Okay, so you see the name Trump everywhere, right? On buildings, on the news. It's all glitz and headlines. But where did it all begin? Like, what shaped that ambition, that drive?
Right.
Today, we are doing a deep dive into the Trump family's roots.
Okay.
Pulling from the Trump family, foundations of an American dynasty, to really understand those core influences.
Wow.
That kind of forged Donald Trump's approach to the world.
I mean, think about it. Forget the headlines for a sec. We're going back to the beginning. The parents.
Right.
Fred and Mary Anne Trump. And I think our goal here is to unpack those foundational elements that really instilled his methods and like his self-belief.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you always hear about that. It's like unbreakable.
It's like the blueprint for this public persona we all know.
Exactly.
And what really struck me is just the contrast in Fred Trump's early life.
Yeah.
Compared to like the later image of his son's empire, right? So Fred, German immigrants in the Bronx.
Okay.
And his father died when he was only 13. So that's young to sort of be thrust into adult responsibilities. So you kind of get this feeling like no choice but to succeed mentality.
Yeah, for sure.
And then at 15, he's already starting a business, building a garage to support his family.
Wow.
16 years old, E. Trump and Son.
Okay.
Named after his mother, Elizabeth, who was a key partner. I mean, it's a world away from like the Manhattan skyline, right?
It's a totally different image than what we see now. And, that struggle, it really sets the stage for understanding this whole like core value of hard work.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's fascinating because his business philosophy, it wasn't about like these huge, architectural marvels or anything. It was about efficiency.
Right.
Providing affordable housing, especially post-World War II.
Makes sense.
These massive developments in the outer boroughs, Shore Haven, Beach Haven, Trump Village, we're talking like tens of thousands of homes.
Wow.
It's a very pragmatic approach, not flashy.
Yeah, functional, durable, profitable. That was the thing. And he was so hands-on, like a real stickler for details. And frugal, too. Like stories about him picking up nails off the ground and reusing things.
Oh, wow.
Pat tells you something about his values.
But it's interesting because it wasn't all just about cutting costs.
Oh, really?
He was also, like, privately very generous, funding college for employees, children, community projects, hospital donations, all anonymously.
That's interesting. It kind of adds another dimension to this guy, right?
Yeah.
Beyond just the business.
Yeah.
I wonder how that played into his influence on Donald. They had these dinner conversations that were less about, family and more like business briefings. And weekends were for site visits, getting exposed to the actual work.
Wow.
And then there's the famous red pen, the symbol of his exacting standards. And Donald himself has said, "My father was my first professor of business. Harvard has nothing on Fred Trump." Like, that says it all right.
It's not just learning the trade.
Yeah.
It's absorbing a way of thinking. Okay, so then you have Mary Anne MacLeod Trump. And her story is completely different but equally powerful.
Oh, yeah.
She grew up in Scotland.
Okay.
Isle of Lewis.
Okay.
Large Gaelic-speaking family. And life was really tough there. There's this one story that really paints a picture. The kids would walk barefoot in the snow
Oh, my God.
to save their shoes for Sunday.
Wow.
So talk about resilience born out of necessity.
That really gives you a whole different perspective on life.
Yeah.
To have to deal with that at such a young age.
Yeah. And then she comes to New York City at 18 with basically nothing and starts working as a domestic servant.
Okay.
Maybe not glamorous, but it gave her this inside look at the lives of wealthy New York families.
Interesting.
Their behaviors, their expectations.
Like a different kind of education, I guess.
Yeah.
Learning by observing.
And then she meets Fred.
Right.
They get married.
Wow.
And then she steps into this role of society hostess, mastering like elegant entertaining, building relationships. She even shed her Scottish brogue for a more polished American accent.
Oh, wow.
That ambition in the social sphere is pretty striking.
That's quite a transformation. It shows a lot of adaptability.
But she never forgot where she came from.
Right.
Her volunteer work at hospitals, often with young Donald by her side,
Okay.
exposed him to a different side of life, you know?
Yeah.
Suffering and compassion and all that.
Yeah.
And, unlike Fred's directness, Mary Anne taught him a different type of power. Donald has said, "My mother could command a room without raising her voice. She taught me that real power doesn't always roar."
That's a powerful lesson.
Yeah.
It's about subtlety. Like reading a room, understanding those social cues.
So we have these two very distinct personalities. both with incredibly formative experiences, coming together to raise a family.
That's going to be interesting.
And their home in Jamaica Estates.
Yeah.
It was this 23-room Tudor-style house.
Wow.
Sort of like a sanctuary, but also a training ground, I guess you could say.
Yeah, like a combination of things, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And even the morning routines were telling. 7 a.m. breakfast. Everyone there, ready to go.
Punctuality.
And Fred would quiz the kids, current events, math, and then business scenarios based on his own work.
Oh, wow.
Like rent arrears or supplier negotiations.
So not just book smarts, but practical application.
Exactly.
That's really interesting.
And if they didn't have a good answer, disappointment.
Yeah, that can be motivating for sure.
And then Mary Anne, on top of, running the social side of things, was also teaching them social intelligence, how to act in different situations, how to make people feel valued, how to make a good impression.
I feel like for someone like Donald, who already, liked the spotlight, those skills were probably invaluable.
Oh, yeah.
On top of the business stuff from his dad.
It wasn't just confined to the house, though. Even Sunday drives became these, learning opportunities.
Oh.
Fred pointing out buildings,
Okay.
talking about construction, telling stories about his deals, even vacations.
I mean, come on.
They would observe hotel lobby designs and talk about, the psychology built into architecture.
That's amazing. It's like a constant immersion.
Yeah.
You can't escape it. It's everywhere.
So it's like they're just absorbing all these lessons. And from all of that, the Trump family book sort of outlines what they call the Trump Code.
The Trump Code.
Okay, like these unwritten rules.
Gotcha.
That shaped their approach to life and business.
So this is key for understanding him. Right?
Yeah. So first you have never show weakness, cultivate that image of strength.
Right.
And then always counterattack.
Okay.
Hit back harder. And the book even talks about how this might have been influenced by Mary Anne's heritage.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
And of course, control the narrative, understanding the importance of public image, managing your reputation.
Right. That's huge.
And then loyalty above all.
Okay.
Family comes first. A united front.
Makes sense.
And this is a big one, right? Winning isn't everything. It's the only thing.
Oh, yeah. I've heard that before.
This really clear-cut view of success and failure.
Wow. So this whole environment, these principles,
Yeah.
it must have really impacted the dynamic between the siblings,
Yeah.
especially when it came to who would take over the business.
So you have Fred Jr., the eldest. It seems like he really struggled with his father's expectations. He was more interested in being a pilot.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So, classic
Like
start.
her firstborn pressure,
yeah,
right?
Yeah, to follow in the footsteps. But he wanted to fly.
It must have created a lot of tension.
Yeah, and while Fred Jr. was trying to find his own way, Donald stepped up.
Okay.
Not only did he embrace his father's demanding nature, but he also, envisioned something even bigger.
Oh.
Manhattan.
Right.
Not just the outer boroughs. It's like this next level of ambition.
Right.
And then, 1981, Fred Jr. dies. And the book suggests this really affected Donald.
I can only imagine.
It reinforced his own decisions about not drinking or doing drugs. And it also probably intensified that drive.
Yeah.
To succeed, to carry on the legacy.
It makes you think about the personal side of it all, right?
Yeah.
And Donald has talked about this, period, about learning to not let anything control you. That really sticks with you.
So now we're in the 1980s.
Yeah.
Donald is getting more and more attention.
Okay.
And I wonder what his parents thought about it all. Fred, this pragmatic builder, seeing his son going for these huge, risky ventures in Manhattan, it must have been complicated.
I bet. The book hints at Fred's concerns,
Yeah.
especially during those tough economic times of the early 90s.
Yeah.
But publicly, he always stood by Donald.
Yeah.
Remember that whole thing with the casino chips?
Yeah.
Like $3.5 million worth, called it a loan.
Right.
Raised some eyebrows. But it really showed that family loyalty,
Yeah.
no matter what.
And then you have Mary Anne, who had, carefully climbed the social ladder herself. Wow. I imagine she had a unique take on Donald's very public, almost celebrity approach.
That's a good point. Her way was much more, discreet.
Yeah.
Behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Donald was all about the spotlight. But at the end of the day, I think they both saw that he was taking those lessons they had taught him.
Right.
And applying them on a scale they could never have imagined.
Yeah. There's this story about when Trump Tower was finished.
Okay.
Mary Anne apparently said he actually did it.
Wow. Like a mix of pride and surprise, right?
Yeah.
How far he'd come.
Okay, so as Fred's health declined in the 90s, Donald is becoming this cultural phenomenon.
It's a part of the deal.
Atlantic City, TV appearances. The torch was being passed even before they both passed away in the late 90s.
It's interesting because in his eulogy for Fred, Donald acknowledged his father's huge influence. Like he credited him with teaching him everything about business.
Yeah.
But he also made a point of saying that they didn't always agree, especially when it came to Manhattan real estate.
Oh, really?
It kind of highlights how even though he learned so much from his dad, he was also determined to make his own mark.
Yeah. So, big picture, we're talking 3 generations of Trumps. Friedrich arrives in America, Fred builds his empire in the outer boroughs, and then Donald goes global.
And into politics.
It's like an evolution of the American dream.
Right.
Exactly.
Each generation building on the last, but also changing what the name Trump stood for.
Yeah.
But there are those constant themes.
Yeah.
Ambition, resilience, showmanship, and of course that unshakable belief in their own destiny.
So for our listeners, why is this family history important?
That's a good question.
Because understanding these core influences, it gives you so much context for a figure who's undeniably shaped the world we live in.
Yeah, it takes you beyond just the headlines.
Yeah.
And helps you understand where he's coming from, how he operates.
It's like seeing the roots of that public persona.
Right. And I think what's especially fascinating is seeing how those two very different styles, Fred's pragmatism and Mary Anne's social skills, how they came together and were amplified in Donald.
Okay, so to wrap up this deep dive, the big takeaway here is that Donald Trump was deeply shaped by his parents, Fred and Mary Anne. Fred, the meticulous builder, taught him about efficiency and getting things done.
Right.
Mary Anne, the resilient immigrant, showed him the importance of social grace and influence.
And they both instilled in him that drive to win.
Those unwritten rules of the Trump family, they all played a part.
So this is where it gets really interesting, right?
Okay.
Given all of that, how do you think those early influences continue to shape his decisions today as he's operating on this global stage?
Yeah, that's a good question.
And what about those unwritten rules
Yeah.
that need to win, that emphasis on loyalty, projecting strength no matter what? Do those resonate with your values or do they clash? Think about it.
It's a lot to unpack, right?
It is. Well, that's the point.
Yeah, this deep dive into the Trump family, it's just the beginning.
Right.
It really makes you think about how family history, the things we're taught, things we just absorb, how it all shapes us and how it shapes the impact we have on the world.
It's powerful stuff.
It is. And it shows you why understanding the past is so important for making sense of the present.
I agree. You can't really understand one without the other.
Exactly.